actually agree. I actually start by teaching experimental work to my students because they need to understand possibility. For so long, the canon is shoved down our throats. I love the canon, it's fine. But like I think of Andy Devine's Words, which was published by Publishing Genius Press, and in one of the stories, he took a story and then deconstructed it and put all the words in alphabetical order. And it's actually really good to see like this story proceeding through the words. It starts with A, as many times as the word appears. And I show this to my students, and it blows their minds. Matt Bell wrote a story called An Index of How Our Family Was Killed that appeared in conjunction. And in this story, he wrote an index of the way his family was, the narrator's family was killed. There's a story Matt Bell who wrote called The Cartographer's Pearl, where part of the story is told through the use of symbols. And I find that when students realize that they don't necessarily have to write a bleak house or a War and Peace, that they can experiment and they can play with form. That's what matters more. We're trying to teach creativity, aren't we? Or are we trying to teach them to be robots? I just think it's just more important. I think form is important. I do. I'm not the kind of like, oh, let's deconstruct all day and just, you know, meditate. It is a form. But I really think you have to do both. So I like to start with experimental and then work in reverse back to some of the more traditional works so that students can understand that what matters more is their creativity rather than how they choose to express it.
Randall?
Hiding. I think one thing that, just when I was in school, that teachers struggle with is grading creative writing. So I think they liked when there was a form that they could grade, because they could say, well, that story is supposed to have this and yours didn't, and that's why you have the grade that you did. So I do think that when it comes to experimental forms, they felt less certain of how they would ever grade a thing. You know? And so I think that idea that in the system or whatever it is, that you have to put a grade on it, makes experimental forms. So I know, like, when my son, seeing him going up through school, he's always writing very kind of traditional things that could be easily graded, because the teachers seem to think that that's the important thing, is that it needs to be something that's graded, which is probably why he only writes Facebook messages.
I want to say, too, because I have a lot of friends who say that, you know, there's a traditional story, there's an experimental story. And I always point out to them that what we think of as a traditional story, or at least I think this is what you think of, which is a kind of neo-Jacobian realism, that in fact is an experimental form. If you were going to teach the traditional form in an American short story, you would be teaching Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne. And nobody does that. Nobody says, you got to know how to do a Poe story before, you know, you can do Chekhov. And so I think that's really strange. I mean, I think there are reasons that now the story that really started at the beginning of the 20th century is somehow thought to be the traditional story. But that, in fact, is an experiment, especially with its coupling with one of the greatest fiction writers of all time, Sigmund Freud. That is an experiment that is incredibly fruitful. I mean, it's been incredibly fruitful for writers, but it's an experimental form of realism.
Well, actually, no, I don't teach. I've lectured at various colleges and I've taught my books, and they're taught primarily in Chicano study courses. And at Cal State LA, I had a chance to have a panel for an anthology I edited, and it was a great, wonderful group of kids. We had one really good discussion, and basically I just threw out the question: why is it important for Chicanos and Chicanas to write fiction? One very timid young man, he could say, because if we don't, other people will. And I said, yes, because you have a story, we all have stories, and your story is as valuable as anyone else's. So that's more in terms of content, in terms of cultural experiences. But it does go to the question of, okay, once the person acknowledges my life story, my experiences, it's worth writing about, the next step becomes, how do I do that? And that's where the MFA programs and creative writing programs, I think that's where you can help, at least give the tools.
I think we might have one more.
This question is more for you, Robert, but others may want to chime in as well. But could you speak to the process of editing the stories in the collection? Because I think you did more than just selecting the ones that
Yeah, there were some. Yeah, The question was about editing the stories and putting together the collection. We received over 2,000 stories when we were open for submission. A lot of them read, and actually, I don't know if Randall we have time for this, but I know Randall said that he just recently did a Twitter contest. And I know Smoke Bomb just recently had a 30-word contest that I actually was the final judge for. And everybody who has been involved in those processes has come up with the same thing. A lot of these were pretty awful. And what it really is because I think that they're not really stories, they're more like thoughts, they're more like anecdotes. They're just kind of statements. And the idea, at least for me, when I was looking for stories for here, was I wanted, it's like I wanted to actually find real stories. I wanted to find things that, told a story that actually stood by itself, that, were effective. And yeah, some of them actually did require some editing. I worked with some of the authors in terms of maybe their titles. The 25-word limit is 25 words, but also the title is really a part of the story. It's maybe like half. It's like, you got the 25-word story, and then the title itself is the other half of the story. And then together, they create that story, because one does not work without the other. And a lot of times, you have maybe a redundant title, or you have the title that just did not make sense at all. And there were times, too, where I think there were some stories that were like, say, 25 words, and I was able to help them edit it down to like maybe 23 or 24, which might not sound like a lot, but it really did, play into making it the most effective piece that it could be. That answers your question, yes. Yeah, at the end of this, we will be down at the book fair at the Norton table at 5:10. I think there are some contributors in here as well. You're more than welcome to come. Are we all going to be down there? Yeah, so we'll be down there. We can talk to you there. We can sign copies. They do have copies for sale. I think they're $10, which is less than retail. Also in the back table back there, there's little promotional chapbooks that we had, which is really just minor stuff. But the Mudlicious Press were kind enough to print up 500 copies. We had those on our little mini tour in LA and New York that we were just kind of handing out. So whatever's left is going to be back there. Feel free to grab one. I think we have time for at least one more question. Yes, sir.
I'm a big fan of Martone Olivas, and Jeff Newton's Cobra Lingus, and all this talk about deconstructing. Do you guys feel like it's more an analytical mindset that attacks this type of form as opposed to, more creative? I don't know what the dichotomy is there, but is there a sense of that at all?
Sir, there's no dichotomy. No, I mean, what are you saying? This was creative, or
No, I mean just people who have more of an analytical bent mind that want to dissect things and want to explode and interject different formulas into their writing, as opposed to just writing. But they want to take maybe the scientific approach, if you want to call it that.
Well, my dialectic is that. Again, it has to do with what the university sort of does. I think the university wants to go to a kind of curatorship, and curatorship, it does, there is creativity to it in that it is, it attempts to sort of solidify the form, to reproduce it, to add to it, but it does have a kind of hierarchy of forms. And I think that the thing I said earlier is sort of the other thing, that it sees the form that's sort of in the lowest, or on the outs of the one, and wants to go the other way. I don't think those books that you mentioned, are not any more creative or less creative than something else. It has to do with the received product into a kind of culture that one is perceived to be normal or traditional, where the other seems to be experimental. These things or these modes have been going on, for a long time. And one sort of ascends into popularity and wide use, and another one sort of retreats. And I think right now, mainly because we have a new technology of this machine that we're now trying to, our brains are now sort of figuring out what can we do with this machine. But it's taken us a while to do it, because basically, most of you probably or a lot of you probably use your machines to create a typed script. You use your incredible machine to create a typed script. And so we have to watch that in this curatorship or in this tradition of the university, that these things are stable or something. We're living in a destabilized thing. Categories of what an author is, that's what we've talked about. What an author is, what a reader is, what an editor is, what an agent is, what publishing is, that is all in flux. The fact that he's got this thing up here, I mean, we don't know what it is. So even to say some people are technical and not, whether you like it or not, you're all technical now. You all got those things in your pocket. And that's not stopping. You're all worried about the email you're missing for coming here. You know, so I think that's, in fact, why books like that have now reemerged. You know, that the university was a kind of buffer that allowed, I think, writers to still use them as sort of typewriters, but a magazine like McSweeney says, game on. And the game is on.
Does anybody else have any thoughts? Any final remarks from anybody about anything? We got 1 minute. Real quick question. Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
Do you have a word limit on titles?
No.
No. No way.
I think the story there is titles actually longer than the story itself.
Yeah, since I've got it, I've written a whole series of these things, and I set it up as 25 words for the story, but at least twice as many for the title.
All right. Thank you to everybody for coming.